Leadership is hard, but we're here for you. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Growth Beyond Limits, the podcast for leaders. We believe in leadership. This podcast focuses on discussing leadership experiences from real leaders in various industries and sectors. We encourage transparent discussions that allow our listeners and viewers to be more successful in their own leadership journey. Today, we're excited to talk with our guest, Colonel Mark Saraparu. Colonel Mark Saraparu, United States Air Force retired, spent over 25 years in active duty, mostly in space operations. He's commanded at multiple echelons and served key leadership roles in several Air Force major commands and 2 combatant commands. Colonel Saraparu deployed several times over his career and supported operations both home and abroad. Before retiring from the Air Force, he had a key role in establishing the initial laydown of what is now the United States Space Force and assisted the Pentagon staff in transitioning space operations, intelligence operations, cyber operations, and acquisition support to America's newest military service. Colonel Saraparu continues to provide his expertise and support to America's guardians in the civilian sector, is an advisory and assistant contract senior program manager, leading an exceptional team of professionals whose mission is to assist the Space Force in developing a multifaceted range infrastructure for space that rivals what exists in other warfighting domains. So with that, I would say good afternoon, Colonel Saraparu. Just want to welcome you here and jump right in. I really want to learn from you today just what it is to be a leader in our military's fighting forces from an officer's perspective. I just want to jump in and start talking about character and integrity and building trust. How does that work? In the Navy, in my experience, we really focused on our values, really focusing on honor, courage, and commitment. So as a unit commander, how do you approach the idea of maintaining character and integrity with hundreds of airmen from diverse backgrounds?
Well, Sean, thank you for having me on the podcast today. It's an honor and a privilege to participate. And we're talking about a subject that I feel very passionate about. So character, yeah. The Air Force has its core values: integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do. So with my airmen, that was something I really harped on. So they joined a professional military service, and there was a reason why we were a professional military service, and there was a mission for us to carry out, and we had to do it in the right way. So you take those young airmen, and brand new second lieutenants love brand new second lieutenants because they're so young and they're eager to learn. So you take them and you instill those core values in them at the very beginning and watch them grow and watch them flourish. So integrity first, right? In order to do this mission, I have to trust you that you will tell the truth at all times, especially an operations mission, right? I got to trust that you will do the right thing, even when no one's watching. That's what we expect. I expect you to do the best that you can to the best of your ability. That's the excellence in all we do part, right? And then service before self. You have to understand that what we are doing, we're supporting an organization that's much larger than the individual. So if you throw those three together and you mix them up like a potion and you make that superior airman, then that's the warfighting airman that we want to go to war with, and quite honestly, what the nation really needs.
That makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. For me, I as someone who was a staff NCO, Chief Petty Officer in the Navy, spending most of my time with the Marines, it was often our responsibility to ensure the execution of what I think we would recognize as commander's intent. And, I think it'd be worthwhile talking about how senior leaders in the officer ranks go about establishing, communicating, and ultimately following through on commander's intent on a decentralized organization, certainly on the command level size, just so our viewers understand in parallel if they operate or work in a field that requires executing command on a decentralized nature, either multiple locations or in different geographic areas, how they might be able to effectively communicate and really make sure that their intent is being carried out throughout the staff levels.
I think the easiest answer to that is trust. So as the commander, you have to trust your subordinate leaders. You have to trust that you have trained them correctly. You have to trust that they understand the mission. They understand the operational goals. They understand what your expectations are with regards to taking care of the personnel that you've put under their charge. When you have established that trust, then only then can you have decentralized execution, because those subordinate commanders, those subordinate leaders will lead those lead that personnel the same way that you would lead them if you were in the field with them.
So it's much more nuanced than I think the average, or maybe I'd ask the question, would you agree it's much more nuanced? I think there's a perception that in the military that there's sort of this group of people that takes in orders and goes out and execute orders blindly. But I heard you speak to the importance of trust. And what would be your instant response to that? I know it's a topic that we talk about within the military ranks, but here's an opportunity to talk about that sort of perception in the civilian ranks that people in the military just blindly follow orders.
That we're robots. I've heard that
Yes.
a lot. No, we're not robots. We're critical thinkers. We feel, right? We have feelings, and then what we do as commanders and leaders, right? Uh, that is a sacred responsibility that we've taken to lead America's sons and daughters potentially into harm's way. It's something that's not taken lightly, right? So you have to have a human being that feels and that's empathetic, sympathetic, but at the same time is able to control their emotions in order to get the mission accomplished. So I think as a nation, at least I know as a nation, we have superior leaders compared to others because of that. So you have to have a lot of trust in subordinate leaders in order to do that, right? It's through the training, it's through making sure that we understand that we understood the commander's expectations and we knew the mission backwards and forwards. I took that as a very young lieutenant, and that I think that shaped me as my career as an officer. So when I did achieve the privilege in order to command a squadron of my own, I remember how I felt when I was that young lieutenant. So when the young lieutenants that were put underneath my charge came to the unit, I could see that in them. I could remember how I felt as that young officer, and wow, the load, the heaviness of the expectations that was placed on me, I could see that in the young folks that I was leading. So you take that and you foster that. You take every opportunity to allow them to understand their mission in a greater sense, because they're there to do the tactical mission. But in order to make a better leader, both officer and enlisted, you have to ensure that they understand the next level. What's the strategic level for what they're doing? Why are they there? Why is this mission important? Why is it important to the nation? And what would happen if we fail at that mission? I think that as the young folks that we bring into the military, having that responsibility is something that you really don't see on the outside in the civilian world at such a young age. So you foster that, you train them, and you train them, and then you train them some more, because then their actions during a wartime scenario becomes second nature, right? And then with that, as they grow, you continue to foster that relationship so that way you give them opportunities to lead as soon as you can. So that way you're growing the next cadre of leaders in your service for the future.
I like that idea. We often talked about it as intrusive leadership, sort of understanding where our members were, what their needs were, not just in terms of mission proficiency, but really making sure that they had the resources or understood where the resources were so that they could take care of their whole self. Kind of that, I guess, what the civilians would call servant leadership to some extent. I really like that you talk about the importance of making sure that they're ready, and we focus on building trust and making sure that we have competent professionals, and we certainly do have some of the best service members in the world anywhere. We were having a conversation earlier before we started recording, but I think it's one of the key aspects. I think it's where military leaders excel beyond any other leadership core, if you will, across industries anywhere. And that's adaptability. As military leaders, you often have to navigate volatility, uncertainty. There's always complexity. Often there's ambiguity and the need to make rapid, well-founded decisions. Certainly the training and the drills and the exercises all factor into that. But I'd love to get some insights from you on, as a senior leader, making your teams comfortable, adaptable, making them comfortable with rapid change. And again, maybe touching lightly on what does that trust look like, and why that trust is important in an ambiguous environment like so many of our world affairs.
So what I'll tell you is just It really lies. I think the question you're really asking is decision making, right? So, in a training scenario, everything is scripted, and you've probably seen that training scenario over and over again. So, in order to react in the appropriate way, based off of the script in that scenario, sooner or later, there's some gamesmanship that happens in a peacetime exercise. But then what happens when you go to war and nothing goes the way that the training scenario went, right? Uh, I would say it's besides just training the operator, the procedures, the steps, the tactics, the techniques, it's also training them to be able to see the situation as it evolves. And as the situation evolves, then your decision making needs to evolve as well, right? So, yeah, focus on the mission, but are you doing what you need to do to take care of the people along the way, especially if you're leading them into a situation where you're leading them into harm's way? How do you take care of those folks? That's the decision making that the leader has to make. So what I believe that what comes through is the natural instincts of the leader. I guess that's where I'm trying to go. The natural instincts of a leader. And sometimes that can't be trained, right? That is a natural talent that a leader has. I often tell a story of, I'm I'm 6 foot even, and I would have loved to play it in the NBA. I understand the game of basketball. I understand all the fundamentals of basketball. I've even coached basketball at the elementary and middle school level when my daughter played. But there's no way that I could have ever gone to the NBA, even with all the knowledge that I have, because I don't have the natural talent of a Michael Jordan or a Steph Curry or anyone else like that. I think it's the same for leadership. We do a great job, I believe, in the US military of putting our leaders through schools, right? So, with you being a Navy veteran, I'm sure you went through several leadership courses before you achieved the rank of chief. And I too, along the way, as a company grade officer, as a field grade officer, I too went through many leadership schools. And what I think those schools is an opportunity for your service to hone your leadership skills. It's the same way where Michael Jordan was the greatest basketball player to ever play the game, but he still had to practice. And I believe those leadership schools, that was the same thing of us practicing. But some leaders can become that Michael Jordan because they have the natural talent within them. So that's a long way of saying that decision making is easy for some leaders because they can see a situation evolve and they know the right decisions to make along the way to posture themselves and their personnel to be in the right spots, per se, in order to get the mission done. Where other leaders who have gone through those same schools ultimately fail because that natural talent may not be there. What I love
And,
about the
and
military, sorry to cut you off.
no, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So, what I love about the military is that those schools that I'm talking about, we take leaders from all different levels of talent. And I think, dare I say, I know, we're able to produce a I don't want to say lowest common denominator, so you're gonna have to cut that out. We produce amazing leaders based off of having the same skill set, but some leaders are able to achieve more than others based off of their national talent.
You're not saying that people can't be trained to be effective leaders, that they can't learn leadership skills to enhance what they are, but not everyone's going to be Jack Welch. Not everyone is going to turn into a Larry Ellison or one of the moguls of industry. But you can certainly learn how to use effective leadership skills in a productive way and make sure that your team can accomplish what their mission is.
Absolutely. And then just to make it more cross-cutting, what I see now as a civilian leader or company manager, um, is to go back and appreciate the leadership training that I did receive in the military. Because I don't see the same level of leadership training across the board in the civilian sector. If there's one thing the civilian sector could learn from the military, is that.
Yeah, it has certainly been my experience and continues to be my experience in one of the first areas where budgets get cut in the civilian world. And I completely understand that it's an issue of being pragmatic in the moment is training budgets, training and travel budgets, being able to take on education or training for staff members is often the first places where civilian organizations may cut budgets to make the bottom line. And I think that's certainly an area where the military is different. The military absolutely stresses training, invests heavily even in the planning of training And you know as well as I do, every single unit in existence has literally years of major training exercises pre-budgeted and outlined and scheduled, and there's teams within units working on those exercises and those scenarios, which sort of takes me to, and maybe unnecessarily so, my next question was going to be about the importance of continuous learning, but I think we kind of talked about it already. I think we really talked about how continuous learning in the military at different levels and different intensities sort of produces the high quality leaders that we see. And for those listeners out there that are in a position to advocate for training dollars for your organization, it's probably a great opportunity to say, I was listening to this podcast, Growth Beyond Limits, and they really talked about how this is a difference in why our military performs so well. I want to jump ahead a little bit and talk about competence and discipline. I've spent most of my time as a Navy corpsman with the Marines, and discipline is certainly something that the Marine Corps is known for. And the lessons I learned while operating with them are things that benefit me every single day of my life. What I would ask of you is share some of your experiences, because your career is so vastly different than my career, certainly, but coming from the space field, I think very different than most careers. It is a very unique opportunity and experience that you've lived. So what does competence and discipline look like there, and how do you foster resilience and a can-do attitude?
So I would say discipline in my line of work while I was in the military was everything. Disciplined operations, rigor in training, evaluations, and then on the job performance. Because a bad day could happen very quickly, especially when I was a space operator, especially in the field of space operations in which I operated in. Discipline was everything. So, as a unit commander, as a young officer leading a flight of operators, communicating expectations, making sure that your expectations were clear. So discipline is paramount to everything we do. Discipline in operations, discipline in the way that we carry ourselves, discipline in the profession of arms. It's everything that we do. So as a young officer and then later on as a more senior officer, that commitment to doing the right thing all the time had not changed. So having the opportunity now in order to mentor my younger airmen and officers, maintained a disciplined and rigorous posture in everything we did inside of my units. So in space operations, there's no such thing as, we can have a bad day, right? So everything had to go right every time, especially in a deployed environment when you're taking equipment from the U.S. and bringing it someplace else in order to do your operations, and the nation is depending on you. We had to make sure that our young folks understood that. And you had to be disciplined in everything that you did to make sure that you were able to accomplish the mission.
I just want to thank you again, really quickly, for being a part, for being willing to come on board and do the podcast. Come on board, Navy language just starts coming out. A couple of military guys talking, but I do want to ask. Because of course, and for the audience, I'll share that Mark and I have actually known each other for many years. I think more than we would like to acknowledge publicly, because we want to keep our age to ourselves. But we go all the way back to junior high.
Yeah.
And obviously both wanted to serve our countries and decided to serve in different ways. But I do want to ask, is someone who I have a lot of respect for and use as a reference for anyone who was interested in going the officer leadership route in the military, or even in pursuit of those executive leadership positions in the corporate world. What advice would you give to anyone wanting to pursue those sort of professional goals, or already on the path to achieve those professional goals, so that they can be successful in their pathway?
Great question. The advice I would give to anyone, let's start with the military in order to be a military officer. First of all, I want to make sure that I am completely clear that I do not believe, and at least from my service, I'll talk about my service in general, that there is an elitist attitude of being between the officer and the enlisted corps. I would tell you that as an officer, The group of professionals that I learned the most from was from my non-commissioned officers. My dad was a non-commissioned officer in the Army, and when I told him I wanted to pursue a commission in the Air Force, the first thing he told me is every duty station you arrive, you find someone, your senior NCO, who's been there forever, and you pull that person in your office, and you close the door and you say, Chief, or for me, Master Sergeant, how do I do my job? Because I'm the brand new officer here, right? I have a huge level of respect for my non-commissioned officers, and that's who I learn the most from. So I think that advice crosses over into the corporate world as well. So if you find yourself in a leadership role within your company, realize that leadership role is a responsibility. I don't see it as a reward. I don't see it as something that you should have hubris behind. It is a responsibility, because the reason why your job is hard, because your job is to take care of the folks that are under your charge. And that's what wakes you up in the morning. That's what drives you every day. What can you do to accomplish in the military the mission, in the corporate world the goals for the company, and how do I take care of the people along the way in order to accomplish that mission? That's what I take very seriously, and that's what drives me, and that's my driving force in my occupation.
I like that. Thank you. Those are great words to close on. So again, I want to thank you for joining us today on Growth Beyond Limits. And for all the listeners out there in all of the different countries that are tuning in, I just want to encourage you to keep doing that. And if you have ideas, if there are specific industries, job sectors, or situations that you'd like to hear explored on Growth Beyond Limits, please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know, and we'll get those things lined up. We'll find the right people to bring on board and have those conversations. Or maybe you're that person that we'll have that conversation with. Until next time, I just want to say thank you and keep tuning in to Growth Beyond Limits. Have a great day.